I'm coordinating the EOSC Secretariat.eu project. I'm working for a consulting company, Technopolis. I'm based in Brussels. What is the EOSC Secretariat about? Well, it's a project that is offering the support, organizational support, policy support, decision-making support to the governance, to the provisional governance of the European Open Science Cloud, and is also trying to ensure that the research communities, the industry community, but all kinds of stakeholders that might be interested and have stakes into open science are closely linked to what is being discussed and what is developed at European level in terms of open science. I want really to thank you all for being here, and a heartfelt thank to Professor Gregor Madic and to Dr. Mojca Kota for having invited me to speak at this event. It happens that in Brussels I have a friend. Well, it's not true, but let's call her a friend. Her name is Ursula, and we have been invited, so it's the coincidence of life, to talk about open science in two different places in Europe. One is Ljubljana, and the other one is Davos for the Economic Forum. We decided about who's going to go where, and because I live in Trieste and then I can go visit my family later on, I decided to come to Ljubljana, and Ursula went to Davos. And I decided that it would be good to hear what she said about European Open Science Cloud at this event, the World Economic Forum, to an auditorium that is equally important as this one.
Europe is going to co-create a framework to allow the use of these data. It should consist of a trusted pool of non-personalized data that governments, businesses, and other stakeholders can contribute to. And thereby, we open up data as a resource for innovation and bring new solutions to the market. And our scientists are already beginning to do this. We are creating a European Open Science Cloud now. It is a trusted space for researchers to store their data and to access data from researchers from other disciplines. We will create a pool of information leading to a web of research insight.
So, in order for the new president of the European Commission to arrive at this point, thank you, in beginning of 2020, the path for this to arrive to this speech is actually quite long in time. It all started in 2015, where maybe we'll not be able to read all the names of the documents that have been worked on and crafted by the European institutions together to the member states. But everything started in 2015, and the final implementation roadmap for the European Open Science Cloud was delivered in the beginning of 2018, and the kickstart of the activity happened in Vienna in autumn 2018, and that was the moment where we said, where the European Commission, the member states, and the many representatives of the stakeholders community in research decided that it was the moment where we have to get this European Open Science Cloud somehow start to build the foundations of it. But what is the opportunity? Well, we all know the paradigm shift that happened after Professor Berners-Lee decided to create this strange thing that we all use right now, which is the World Wide Web. And indeed, there is a paradigm shift. So we see that we are moving from a Gutenberg-based science that started in the 16th century now to the World Wide Web science. Those are paradigm shifts, but that doesn't mean that everything is going to be overturned. These are paths that can actually work together pretty well. The opportunity that is now lying in front of our eyes is that the exploitation of the power of the web to connect the research communities in order to collaborate and share quicker and more easily their findings and their data. What are the purposes of the European Open Science Cloud? Well, first of all, is to enable the open science and enable the digital transformation of science. There are plenty of opportunities there that are not still open enough in order to implement and to arrive to a full digital transformation of science. And of course, at the core of the European Open Science Cloud is the community of the 1.7 million European researchers. And not only European researchers, the idea is really to go way beyond the European system. Another reason is to build an open research data commons in Europe that is inclusive of all the disciplines. Well, you've heard it before from Ursula von der Leyen. And give Europe a global leader in research data management. We are slowly, and we are not noticing enough, and it would be nice to see the normal media, the mainstream media outlet to make the community, the population, the European population aware of how much slower we are getting in Europe in order to have a fully implemented digital research data management. You've heard it in the HPC presentation before, and this is the same is happening actually in open science. Open Science Cloud is there also to allow a full development of a full development of an internet of fair digital objects, and then especially also to reduce the fragmentation of the existing research infrastructures, to create a better connection, to make a federation. This is the full purpose of it. And of course, enable interdisciplinary research to address societal challenges. And in the eyes of the European Commission, which is the guardian of the European single market, which is the main purpose still of the European institutions, EOSC should enable to make this the European single market even more prosperous. What is the European Open Science Cloud then? Well, again, you've heard it before, it's a trusted and open virtual environment for the scientific community with seamless access to services addressing the whole research data life cycle. So yes, it's a federation of services. It's the whole principle of the European Open Science Cloud is creating a federation of repositories and the creation of federation of research infrastructures based on fair competition, fair both in the two meanings of fairness, and fair is fundable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. It has to be, this is the focal point, free at the point of use for researchers. It has to be user-oriented and inclusive. By the way, the idea of the European Open Science Cloud is that at the end, when it's fully delivered, it will be governed and owned by the users community, by the researchers community. It has to be accessible through a non-exclusive and simple universal gateway. We are trying to build this EOSC portal where you can access from different portals, so not a single one, non-exclusive, but still at the end you always reach the final outlet, which is going to be the European Open Science Cloud Portal. There has to be a minimum set rules of participation, and the governance is based on increasing mutuality. We can call it the European Open Science Cloud an open festival for science. It's a virtuous place indeed, but there the science producers and science consumers can really gather together and have this fruitful and prosperous exchange of information and data and of knowledge. It's based on inclusion of people to all backgrounds and cultures, of course. And this is another thing. I jump into the last element, the quality mark data made in Europe. This, again, as I was saying before, we are slowly getting behind in this. We have to really make the brand of the data much more evident, because what is produced at European level is of extremely good quality, but apparently we're not anymore able to make it visible. European Open Science Cloud is growing in stages. We are now at this very embryonic phase. And indeed, we have built some groups, some expert groups that are identifying now, I will talk about this in a while, about the kind of the underlying infrastructures that have to be developed and how these infrastructures are going to be owned and operated. Ideally, we need to engage with the private initiatives. This is very important for us. This is where US is a bit more proficient than at the European level, but still we need to have the private sector very much engaged in this. There has to be a full adherence to the rules and to the common values, the European common values. And the European Open Science Cloud will hopefully in the end be a living and breathing system that adapts to changes. What are the designing principles of the European Open Science Cloud? This is co-creation. So it's mutual effort of all the stakeholders to build it. It's a mutual exchange and a laying foundational bricks of the European Open Science Cloud. But the main driver is, of course, the community of researchers. So possibly you. It's a community-driven effort. So it's really the community of researchers being at the center of it. The cloud is going to be flexible, extensible, scalable, incremental and iterative, participatory. I will never have enough of saying that how much participation at the participatory level is going to be important in the European Open Science Cloud. And it's going to be built around the principle of continuous engagement, consultation, and continuous user testing. But in the end, this can all be summed up in the three main pillars for this implementation of the European Open Science Cloud: cooperation, common interest, and voluntary participation. There has to be, of course, a decision-making process to structure that is going to be to bring the EOSC live, and there have to be 5 principles for having this decision-making process implemented: openness, broad consensus, transparency, balance, and due process. So you can see how the fact of open science, open access is reflected also in the very basic principles of how the community is going to handle and manage the European Open Science Cloud. Everything is all around openness and transparency within the researchers community, but also at policy level, and also hopefully when the industrial sector, when the private sector will have the same feeling of legitimate ownership of the European Open Science Cloud. There is, for the time being, a provisional governance structure that has been designed in the European Open Science Cloud implementation roadmap, and this is going to last till the end of this year. There are two main boards. One is the governance board, where the member states and EU member states and associated countries are represented. There's a executive board made of 11 neutral representatives from the sectors. Basically, ideally, you could say that is somehow like the General Assembly of Shareholders, the governance board. So the member states representatives, the ones that are actually putting the money in it. And the executive board is more like the board of directors. So where the continuous management of the European Open Science Cloud is taken care of. And at this time, we are also trying to build the stakeholders forum, now that we're going to change in stakeholder community, which is going to be an equally important governance body of the European Open Science Cloud. We want to transform, we are designing actually some solutions at this very moment. We really want to have the stakeholders community represented at EOSC level in order to steer, to help, to support steering the governance and the decision-making of the European Open Science Cloud. In order to do that, the executive board has decided to set up some working groups that are dealing with several different topics of the EOSC, and I will talk about this in a while. And at the very bottom of these structures, there's the EOSC Secretariat that I'm coordinating and is offering support, organization, policy, financial support to all these kind of bodies and entities in order to contribute to the implementation of the EOSC through support to EU-funded projects, nationally funded project initiatives, any kind of initiatives that you have in mind, and also by engaging with the people that have already declared their support and their availability and their engagement in the delivering EOSC by subscribing to the European Commission register of users, or more, or using the original term, the coalition of doers. As said, there is a governance board with representatives from 28 member states and 10 associated countries. There's one representative per country. Slovenia is so important it has 2. And it's chaired by the German representative Hans-Josef Linken, and has decided to set up a couple of subgroups in order to support and to feed with inputs the other parts of the boards that are implementing the governance at the EOSC level. By clicking to the link, you will find a full list of the member states representatives. This is the panel of the 11 experts that are making up the component of the executive board. Karel Leuben from the Netherlands, from CESAR, and Katrin Stover from the Géant infrastructures are chairing together the executive groups. We have 8 representatives of stakeholder groups coming from UKRI or OpenAIRE, FAIR, CESTA, and so on, plus 3 independent experts. And both boards are really willing by making use of the Secretariat channels to ensure that communications is delivered continuously, but on 2-way. So from the governance level, reaching out the stakeholder community, but also the other way around. For example, at the EOSC Secretariat, we have implemented liaison platforms. I actually invite you to go to the eoscsecretariat.eu websites and find all the different engaging opportunities that are on display. And one of them is the liaison platforms, where all the people that feel concerned about EOSC can actually provide inputs, feedback, comments, requests about what the governance level, especially through the working groups at this time, are delivering and designing. We are, as said, the governance is provisional and is going to set up the rules about the European Open Science Cloud at the end of this year. So 2020 is the year for the stakeholders community, for the researchers community, to step in, raise your hands and say, express your needs about European Open Science Clouds. And this can be done at many levels, of course, workshops, conferences, this opportunity, but there are many channels. One is the liaison platforms, where you are constantly fed with the outputs coming from the working groups, and you are free, in full openness and transparency, you're free to deliver and to give your feedbacks and comments. And also to ask for ways for engagement. So how can we be engaged in it? How can you provide tools for demonstrate our engagement in the European Open Science Cloud? We are happy to support. I will talk about this again later, about possible ways that the Secretariat is offering to support engagement of the community. When we talk about community and engagement, of course, we want to deliver a strong and consistent communication strategy. The messaging in different languages according to the community we want to reach to. We want to use the existing communication channels, but also develop new ones, especially with the final objective that the EOSC brand is collectively owned, so that everybody in the community can feel free to have the EOSC badge on their initiatives, because they feel that they own it and they have laid together some foundational bricks to and stones to the European Open Science Cloud. Of course, we try to exploit every possible way to engage with stakeholders and to provide the stakeholders' way of testing and providing feedback. Here you have a list of documents that have been delivered by the governance up to now. There is an EOSC strategic implementation plan. There is a EOSC work plan that has been published. You will find it. I didn't put this link here. I copied an old slide, I have to say, but you can find it also on the EOSC Secretariat website. You find the description of the working groups. There's the co-chair of the executive board is constantly feeding the blog with posts, interesting posts about what's happening in Brussels, but not only in Brussels, what's happening wherever there's a movement, an interesting movement in the European Open Science Cloud. The governance, the executive board has decided to set 5 working groups: landscape, rules of participation, architecture, fair and sustainability, and they cross-feed each other. The first one is the landscape group, And it has the objective of providing options for progressive convergence and alignment of existing structures and initiatives in Europe. And it's now in the phase of issuing a report about existing EOSC/open science related initiatives across Europe at local level, regional level, cross-border levels across Europe. It's taking stock of federation constraints and opportunities at various architecture levels. And in the report, it's going to propose mechanisms and best practices for national and regional alignment. And it's actually giving an oversight of the member state preparedness for financial resources, political stability, and infrastructure planning. This is very important, because this will provide then ideas for the sustainability of the EOSC at national level. Another working group is the Rules of Participation working group that is going to recommend rules of participation defining rights, obligation, and accountability to govern EOSC users, providers, and operators by identifying also common requirements. It takes into account the various roles and services that made up the European Open Science Cloud, the fact that there are different disciplines, scientific disciplines, that there are different degrees of preparedness in infrastructure, services, and also in the member states, that there's a different preparedness also in the range of EOSC users and providers, and is also focusing on the changing needs and practices, including, of course, regulations. The most technical one is, of course, the working group on architecture, which is going to define the technical framework to enable and sustain the evolving European Open Science Cloud, taking care of the principle of interoperability. And right now, it's reviewing the EOSC core services and interfaces, or trying to give guidelines about how the EOSC core services should look like at the end of this year. Definition of open science APIs, how the EOSC portal should be architecturally structured, and then definition of standards, best practices, and create consensus about an accepted framework. Then we have already discussed about FAIR. There is a working group about FAIR data recommending providing recommendations on implementation of FAIR principles, especially with corresponding requirements for services, so that the cross-disciplinary interoperability is finally ensured. And the final one, the one where the governance, especially at the member state level, is now focusing its discussion, it's the sustainability. So really how the European Open Science Cloud is going to look like in terms of its legal framework and then financial sustainability. There are many options on the table at this very moment. Right now, the most probably we're gonna have an EOSC legal entity that will be formed in beginning 2021. It will have the structure of a co-program partnership that will receive funding through the European Commission, but also with support from the member states. And right now, we are trying to identify how the member states will provide their contribution, and also how the users at the end will have the final owners of the European Open Science Cloud will have their way of supporting also financially, because it's a creator that has to be alive somehow, the structure of the European Open Science Cloud. I haven't mentioned in this presentation, but there's a sixth working group that is right now being set up, which is the working group on training and skills. And its work is going to start beginning of next month. What's the final objective? An MVP, so a minimum viable platform, should be finally released at the end of this year, after the collection of all this collective work from the working groups. So the minimum viable platform will be based on agreed and tested rules of participation, coming from an analysis of existing national infrastructure and policies. A financing model and a legal entity must be delivered. There will be a federated core with some initial services as from beginning next year. And the users will be provided with a catalog of services that a European Open Science Cloud can provide to the researchers community. There will be an interoperability framework and a policy of persistent identifiers and the metrics for fair data and repository certification after the very nice work of FAIR project that will be taken into account and will support the governance in set up this final pillar of the European Open Science Cloud, especially the minimum viable platform end of this year. We'll not talk about the work plan, but there's a very consistent and structured work plan that is going to be implemented across this year. How the working groups have been made. Components are actually nominated by the member states. So in each working group, there are components, experts selected by the representative of the member states in the governance board. So I can show that there's a Slovenian representative in every working group that you've seen. Some nominations have also been presented internally by the executive boards, and also some Horizon 2020 funded projects had the opportunity to provide their expertise into the working groups. There might be across during this year open calls for experts to join the working groups, and some opportunity for working groups to ask specific experts to come and support the work of the working groups might also pop up during 2020. Few stats about the working groups. Almost actually 20 EU member states and associated countries are represented in the working groups. Still, especially in the architecture part, the technical one, the male component is far overrepresented. So feel free to convey any complaint through the liaison platform and have your head speak to the female components of this auditorium to have your voice heard there. And finally, the last part, how the EOSC Secretariat is going to can support the community to help the implementation of the Open Science Cloud at any possible level, from national down to local level to research communities and so on. The EOSC Secretariat has been allocated by the European Commission with a quite big amount of budget, 3.5 million euros. That is to support through a co-creation approach any possible activity that is meant to foster, support the implementation of the European Open Science Cloud in Europe. It can be at national state, it can be a local level, it can be at university level, it can be at research communities level, and so on. So, and actually any European citizen and any European legal entity can apply for budget to the European, to the EOSC Secretariat co-creation budget. fund to receive support for their activities. What do I mean with activities? Can be a conference, a workshop, publications, setting up of working groups, setting up of platforms. Really, be creative. If there's anything that you would like to be funded that has the objective, the final aim of having the European Open Science Cloud discussed, implemented, making awareness campaigns and so on, wherever you feel there is the need, the European Open Science Cloud Secretariat will be happy to support. Eligibility criteria, the same of the Horizon 2020. So pretty basics, being in the activity has to be located in Europe. That doesn't mean that entities outside Europe cannot be involved. Of course, transcontinental initiatives are to be considered, but still the funded entity should be in Europe. There are certain thresholds. Actually, the maximum amount that can be asked is 45,000 euros. And otherwise we incur procurement rules of the European Commission. And the activities have to have some links with the work of the EOSC governance. So the executive board, working groups, stakeholder committees and so on. But basically, since the EOSC governance, broadly speaking, is there to support the implementation of EOSC at any possible level, then any kind of activities might, of course, under a certain reasonability criteria, can be funded. The final criteria is that there has to be some added value that is added actually to existing EOSC activities, and that the final outcomes of the funded activities can be somehow quantified with some KPIs that you can find on the EOSC Secretariat website. The process for funding these activities through the Secretariat co-creation budget lasts from 30 to 45 days, which means that you submit your request, it arrives to the Secretariat. The consortium, which is made of 11 partners, first gives a preliminary check that all the data are there. If something is missing, we ask for some more documentation, and then we give some time for possible adjustments. Then the steering group of the Secretariat, 11 partners, convenes every 2 weeks to discuss the requests that we get. And once they are validated, we communicate immediately the result. Generally, it's approval. There might be some rejections, and in very short time, it also delivered the pre-financing, which is the 50% of the requested budget, and the rest will be delivered to the requester after the activity has been completed and upon presentation of all the receipts, so that we see that actually everything has been done according to the rules, and we actually give the 50%, the other 50%, if that is the amount that has been used, or otherwise the amount that is missing to cover all the expenses that have been incurred by the requester. And of course, we also ask for a short report about the activity, so that we can validate the final payment and check it according to our KPIs, which I've said a few minutes ago. Where to apply? The EOSCSecretariat.eu website. there's a link there, co-creation calls or funding opportunities. There's a request form, pretty simple. It's an Excel where you can insert your data. You give a brief explanation of the activity. In the table, you list all the budget items that you would like to be funded, like would say renting of the room, catering, translators, interpreters, and so on for an event, or if it's setting up a web platform, web designer, and so on, you name it. Please, I really encourage you to have a look and to think about it, because we are extremely open to fund any kind, I underline, any kind of initiatives that might bring any added value to the support of the European Open Science Cloud. Be creative. There are many things going on, but they tend to have the same kind of impact, which is now lowering. I mean, workshops, conferences, publications, on very nice work. There are many opportunities of engagement, but still the impact we can see it's lowering. But there's plenty of initiatives that can be done, and I really encourage you to have a look and be creative. We are happy to promote any kind of creative idea. And for any information, any detail that you might need, go on the website, reach out there. There's my mail, my colleagues' email. We can provide you with any kind of information for this. And yes, let's get this show on the road. Thanks again to all of you. A special thank to David, who has provided me with a great interpretation of all the speeches that have been delivered in Slovenian. And thanks. And again, thanks to the organizers of this event and to all of you.